I haven't.
What's been like pressing with you lately, or themes you've considered?
So I am having to do a lot of professional learning more so. It feels like this is a never ending source of learning for me is attachment ruptures early in childhood
Yeah.
and how to repair that within like EMDR, using the EMDR protocol, but also how to repair that because it obviously it's appearing, when people have attachment ruptures, it appears in their marriages or their relationships, the stressors they have at work. And that just seems to be like a universal theme. And so I've signed up for some training on how to address early attachment trauma, like from 0 to 5. And I'm looking forward to that. But the theme seems to be like having to suppress my authentic self in order to get acceptance from my parent.
Yeah.
Like with cultural messaging, parental expectations. And then just, a lot of parents, well, at least the clients I see, so I get kind of a pathological population, but their parents were just high on drugs or just completely checked out for one reason or another and just were unemotionally unavailable.
Yeah,
So now
you
that's
sprinkle
created a
addiction
tremendous
on
amount of dysfunction.
like a parental attachment. It pretty much designates the child suffered from neglect and abuse. Even if it's,
Yeah.
even if like the addiction isn't running rampant and you're not like looking after your kid on the street, like even if you have a multi-million-dollar estate and all the boxes are checked in order and you're functioning at least on a work basis and you're having dinner every night, like even in that best option or case scenario with addiction, it's like you still are experiencing irregularity in the parents' emotions, their expectations, their own mood. It's a mess. And how confusing
It's a complete mess.
if that's the model for, hey, this is how you interact with humans. This is how you receive attention from humans. That's the archetype, is someone that is that irregular, whether it's like substance use or like a severe mental health thing. It's like these kids are pretty much lost in the woods.
Yeah, and they're raising themselves, and so then these personality adaptations come into play. These children are very brilliant subconsciously or unintentionally, but they create these adaptations to have a sense of normalcy and regular interaction with their parent, even though it's within the context of dysfunction. Like parentification, for example. I know we covered that in another podcast episode. But people pleasing, for example, that's another one. And so, yeah, it's interesting how many people come to me for, quote, anxiety, but in reality, it's just a deep fear of just not being good enough or not being worthy enough. At least that's kind of what the discussion leads to, those negative core beliefs.
And the kids that are raised in those environments, I'm speaking from myself as well. It's like the intuition becomes a survival adaptation in that playground, right? But when you leave that playground and you go to a different playground with different characters and different personalities, that intuition is possibly no longer accurate. It's possibly no longer adaptive. Like for myself, right? Is like I've realized if I'm dating someone and they're like sick, I have this activation that fears irregular emotion towards me. Like that they're going to become
irregular emotion. Is that what you just said?
Yeah. Like they'll become intolerant or angry towards me. So I think that's a parallel of what we're talking about, where like if my parents were struggling with something when I was younger, my intuition, which was correct, which would be to like just stay out of her way. Don't rock the boat. Try to be careful. So I think that intuition, you know, it served me in that microcosm, but as an adult, it's like, oh, that's not always going to be accurate. Like just because someone doesn't feel well, there are people in this world that have like a higher level of emotional intelligence that can acknowledge, oh, I feel like shit. I don't actually feel anger towards Evan. I just don't like how I feel. I feel, you know, tired and achy. It's not Evan is just being a little shit. Is that like a similar
so you've had
parallel?
to learn to yes. So I imagine that you've had to have that inner dialogue with yourself where you're like, it's possible this person's emotions just aren't about me.
Yeah, and it sucks to like notice that, right? It's like, wow, there's this residue. Despite all the knowledge and emotional work I try to do, it's like there's still this body memory that I have to keep in check. I have to acknowledge it and then like reassure it and then try to comment, or it will hijack the ways that I react, and it could often even be come out as like indifference or guardedness, where I really actually care and want to and caretake, but my intuition's saying stay out of the way. Don't be a burden. Don't be annoying. Let them deal with their shit on their own. Because that's what, you know, my mother would want to have done.
So you're finding yourself making you small. You're making yourself small.
Yeah, and so it's
like don't do anything
like,
to bring attention to yourself.
The adaptive or the maladaptive, the intentionality behind it is to caretake, right? Being out of the way is the caretaking. But in all actuality, it could be perceived as me being avoidant and distant. But the reality truly is, internally, I'm fearful that I'll be yelled at or ridiculed or attacked because this person doesn't feel well. It's pretty fucked up.
That's really fucked up. Because, I mean, whatever, like I said, maybe whatever parent who did that, like I have so many thoughts right now. I'm getting flooded.
It was my mother, Melissa.
Like that. Okay, I didn't want to throw anybody under the bus, but okay,
Fuck
so
her.
your mom just couldn't take responsibility for how she felt. Like she couldn't just say, okay, I feel really sick right now. I'm going to go lay down.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if Evan's hungry, he can make himself a bowl of Cheerios. He'll be fine.
Well, yeah, it's like
Instead, she
the
would
child
just,
tantrum.
Okay, and she would just project and turn outward.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then now, fast forward to the age you are now, have you ever confronted your mom about that?
In passing, but she has like an incapacity to personal responsibility.
Okay.
So it's like a win. It's like a lose-lose.
So to confront her,
it's acknowledged and validated by other people that observed and experienced, but like as far as her, that's a losing game. And even so, like it gets to that point where with certain people that have been harmful, it's like there isn't much to hear that would, like, it's been 30 years. What can you really say that's gonna repair that? Even and I think when we're trying to look at repairing relationships with parents, it's like they have to have done a lot of their own work as well, like to be reparative in that relationship. It's not just an acknowledgement. It has to. It necessitates like individual work from the kid and from the parent, and then in a perfect world, with family therapy.
So then your mom would have to have done her own individual work to get to a place where she could acknowledge and verbalize, while holding some measure of shame, I fucked up.
Right.
I am sorry.
Yeah.
And I'd like to relate to you now as an adult.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like if I heard that sentence, I think my brain would split in half, even if that was just articulated that way, much less actually enacted with behavioral pinch.
But like, what would it do to you? Okay, your brain was split in half because it's like cognitive dissonance, but
I mean, I would just be like,
go.
Are you Melissa? It just wouldn't. It would not compute. Like that would never happen. Would never happen.
Like I had this moment with my son just last week. Okay, so last Friday there was it was a day off from school for the President's Day weekend. And I had to work, Mike had to work. So of course I'm just not going to encourage my children to sit around playing video games all day as much as they would love to do that. So I created this chore chart, and I made 5 copies, and I called everyone downstairs. And I guess it was my tone of voice. Like I had this commanding, take charge tone of voice. And one son comes downstairs and he says, "Who died?" Like when I said, "Everybody get down here." And I was like, "Nobody died. Like what's the
Shit.
drama?" And they're like, "Well, you have that voice." And I was like, they're like, "Something's coming our way." And I was like, "Yeah, it's your chore chart." And they're like, "Oh no." And so my eldest son was like, "God damn it, why are you putting me on this chore chart? I'm 18 now. You know, if anybody walked into this house and saw that I was on this chore chart, I would be totally embarrassed. I'd probably kill myself." You know, some dramatic. And he was just going on and on how I'm patronizing him by including him on the chore chart. And I had this moment, and I was like, I just took responsibility. It was amazing what I took responsibility for me and my own personal growth and development. I turned to him and I said, "I'm not responsible for you feeling patronized. That's on you. I'm responsible for explaining what I need. And what I need is for you guys to take responsibility
What's
for your own
expected.
personal spaces." Yeah, I mean, I'm not asking them to go outside and, change the oil in the car or something
It's
like that.
It's also
Be
funny
outside of
because
their
you're
developmental
18.
ability.
It's like you're 18. You have more responsibility, not less. You know,
He's really
That's
not
what's
adjusting
funny.
well to that reality.
yeah. Doesn't mean you have less responsibility.
But I was really proud of myself for not having an emotional reaction to being accused of patronizing him. Whereas
Yeah,
I
like that
think,
could have
10
evoked
years
shame,
ago, I
and
might
then
have
you
been
could-
I would my own shame. And then I would have reacted and gotten defensive and then gotten into this fight stress response. But I didn't even have a stress response. I just stated the observation that it's not my responsibility.
It's a beautiful
However,
thing to
that leads
just
me
not.
to my next thought.
Oh, go ahead. I think we're lagging a little bit, so sorry about that. I'm not trying to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Oh, no, that's okay. No. Share your thought, because what I was going to say was kind of pivot us a little bit.
Go ahead. I forgot.
Oh. So my next thought is, how many times as a therapist have your clients reported to you that after a certain number of sessions or a certain amount of time of doing work with you, the client is now being accused by their family members of being brainwashed in therapy?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I have a client I see currently. She said it in passing as a joke, but that her boyfriend hates me. So, and alluded to and acknowledged that it was because changes the client was making, and I mean it's a dysfunctional dynamic, and she's starting to set limits and boundaries and not personalize his emotional states, and he doesn't like it. Because I think it reduces the tact for manipulation.
Right.
And I don't think it's a conscious thing that that guy is doing or saying. It's obviously probably a learned relational script from his attachment styles, but it's forcing him to look at himself. It's like it's like the analogy of this might be a shitty analogy, but if someone comes up to me randomly and is screaming and threatening and just being psychotic, and I meet them there, and I'm tearing my shirt off, I'm ready to fight and all this stuff, and then a cop walks into the room. He sees two psychotic, dysregulated males. In the other scenario, if I'm wow, that guy seems very unstable right now, I'm not sure what's going on with him, let me just keep my cool, allow him to get out whatever energy he needs to, and to not make anything worse, and the cop walks in the room. He looks at that guy and says, wow, that guy's really crazy. He's really dysregulated. The entire focus becomes on the person that's evoked that, then instead of me meeting them there. So how was I tying this into what were we talking about?
I think just like the value in being regulated, and how being regulated and taking stock of yourself and stating your own needs.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I mean,
so,
it has this, it like
so
forces the other person to make a choice.
Right. So, okay. Yeah. So it allows for the person to not look at me and say, look how crazy and dysregulated, even if I've started this, right? I could then look at the other person that's reacting and saying, oh, that's why I'm still doing it, because this person is. It evokes a mirror towards your own behavior and emotional states if the person you're interacting with does not meet you in that same place. It like kind of forces, because that would happen at work where we used to work, where like people would be like freaking out and erratic, and I would just be like, and over time, I don't think they ever like vocalized that, but they became angry with me because I think it evoked their own shame and embarrassment as to how they handled their emotions. So if they could live the life for a bit that I was indifferent, that I didn't care, that I was stupid. But over time, I think they began to subconsciously realize it was an impediment, an impingement, like on their workflow, their emotional state, how they were acting in the company. But then that got transferred. Instead of feeling shame, the anger and, judgment towards me is what I think protected them from that shame.
Because it's so easy, like if someone's dysregulated for whatever reason, and then they just start, and they're like in a fight stress response, and they come into an interaction, and then they get the person they're interacting with to get a fight stress response. So now there's just like this verbal volleying going back and forth, and there's like, gesticulation and screaming and arguing. There's a loss in understanding of what the core issue ever was. And so I think the person who started it or approached, it's like that. It's a power differential or a power thing too. Like, now I can get this other person to get dysregulated. We'll never talk about the core issue. And then that other guy, I can make that other person look like the bad guy because look how terrible they're reacting.
Yep. And then, so the accountability never occurs too.
Yeah. The accountability never occurs. So then what I'm seeing is in my clients is, as we really do like nervous system mapping with the polyvagal theory and understanding what our triggers are for different stress responses and how to handle those stress responses in a way that makes my body feel good, then the other partner or the parent or the other person is just so baffled and confused as to why we're not having the vitriol and the negative energy that we used to have. And they don't know what to do with it.
No one gave me this script. What is this?
Yeah,
it's the wrong script.
Exactly. Because I have had at least 2 clients tell me that their parents have told them that that therapy is just brainwashing them. Yeah. Because now
sometimes our brains need washing.
Engaging in exactly. Because like instead of engaging in the silliness of the argument or whatever it is and screaming and slamming doors, now the client is like just saying, you know what, this isn't a good time for me to have this conversation, and they leave.
And I'm sure that infuriates their parents.
It does. It does. But that leads me to this quote I just read. And granted, this is just one person's perspective, and it's rooted in cynicism, but I think it's interesting nonetheless. It says, "You are only acceptable to the dysfunctional family if you follow their rules and roles. You experience rejection when you assert your needs, opinions, or desires. You lose love," and that's in quotes, "for stepping outside your prescribed role or telling the truth about the family's dysfunction." And I think that's what a lot of my clients are doing to lead to the accusation that they've been brainwashed.
So, not my circus, not my monkey.
Yeah. I think people are taking responsibility for themselves.
I've come across like the family contracts where it's this belief that we're blood, therefore we have the authority to treat you worse than a person we run into at CVS or a gas station. It gives us I think we've mentioned that in a previous episode, but it's like this contract where I can manipulate. I could even steal a lot of money from you, but I'm your dad. So what you going to do about it? I'm still going to be invited to your wedding. And it's like, fuck. Why?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
I can see from my own culture, like Southern culture upbringing, that was certainly it was a subconscious messaging. I think it was something I observed from not immediate family as much, but like grandparents or aunts and uncles, like that kind of belief system that we're family, we stick together no matter what, which I think the sentiment of that is altruistic, or it's like, it's motivated in positivity. Yet when you maintain that ideology in spite of abuse and like chaos and lying and manipulation, it loses its validity. And I think people sometimes don't honor that change. Honoring the change would be like, oh, the rules have changed. Like these, you've crossed these certain boundaries that no longer afford you the right to say it's because we're family. Like you need to just work through it. It's like, oh, you should just work through it with your brother. He's your brother, right? But like maybe your brother fucking had sex with your spouse, or like there are lines here. And then I think then the family might guilt trip you, like, oh, you don't want to go to the holiday function because your brother's there, and they're doing it for their own selfish reasons because they want to see the family dynamic being in this cohesive space. So you get these different like pushes in different directions.
Yeah, I had a brilliant client once make this observation about the dysfunction in his family, and he was explaining. He said shame is the intervention. So like when family members, behave in a way that maybe the broader society or the broader family wouldn't approve of, there are members of the family who clamp down hard on that behavior to use shame as the intervention for correction. And that, I think, is what a lot of these clients are taking responsibility for, is no longer feeling shame and instead just meeting their own attachment needs, whatever those might be in the moment. And that is very confusing to the broader dysfunctional family.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I play by a different set of rules now. It's like a family playing baseball, and then you go and learn soccer, and then you come to the baseball field and you're kicking a soccer ball around. It's like, why do you have a soccer ball here? This is a baseball field.
Yeah.
And then they can make it look like you're the idiot, right? But you're the one who looked at the schedule and it said it was soccer today.
Yeah.
But we were talking about initially attachment rupture and how that happens in a client interaction.
Yeah,
you and I do some mushrooms today?
Oh,
we're
no.
microdosing.
Oh my God. Speaking of that. So I don't know if Mike says I've been using the word anxiety, like somewhere between like maybe, I don't know, probably the holidays, like November through January. So for my birthday, he bought me, he's crazy. He bought me a bag of CBD gummies. I know you're in recovery, so that's not something you use, but so that shit.
I have a story
like
about that
for me.
Is it THC or is it the non-THC one?
It's supposed to be CBD. Yeah, it's supposed to be non-THC. Nevertheless, I recognize that's not like a FDA regulated process to extract the chemicals, but the instructions read, if you're new to CBD gummies, take half. Okay, so I'm like, all right, fine. I don't do this. I took half. That shit put me to sleep for at least 12 hours.
Holy shit.
So I can't.
Wow.
I mean, it's ridiculous. Like
Did you
I
take it
woke
at
up
night, or did
in
you
like
just like have
such
to
a
sleep
fog. I
a
did. I took
whole
it too
day?
late. I took
Well,
it
that's
like at
good. No, I
11
mean that's
p.m.
probably good though. At least you didn't pass out all day.
Oh no! I took it at night before going to bed.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I have a
that's
friend
that
that
Benadryl.
is.
That's a no go for me.
I have a friend that's not very like. He's a little ditzy, and one of his clients' parents. He's not a therapist, but one of his clients' parents gave him a holiday gift, and like he's a musician, like does stuff like that, but gave him CBD gummy pack, like a pack of them, and something else, and he didn't think of it, and he just like popped them, and like 30 minutes later, he's like, "Whoa, something's up here," and then realized that he had ingested like they were THC. So he'd ingested like a whole bag of THC gummies and was super high for like a whole day. But I will say that like the marketing, like even CBD they have like marijuana leaves on the packaging too. So it looks similar. And if anyone I knew in recovery like would do that unintentionally, it would be this guy. Poor guy.
Oh God! So what did he have to do for his recovery?
Well, he talked
you just
about
had to
it.
Sleep it off.
Yeah, I mean, sleep it off. Talk about what happened. Just be honest. I mean, it's not like, oh, you have to start over all these things. It's like, yeah, dude, that's fucking. You need to like check things like that you're ingesting. You can't just mindlessly like pop something. So it's like within a long-term recovery, the reality is there's so many substances around in the world that you will accidentally ingest something at least once. And so it's we more so focus on what's the motivation and intention. So if he looked at the bag and saw, oh, this is THC, fuck it, I want to get high, and took them, that's different than if he's like just opens them up and pops them and then goes back to doing another session, doesn't think about it, 30 minutes later realizes his voice seems to sound kind of weird in his head, and then it progresses from there. So it's about the motive and intent more so than like, have you ingested something? Because when I was in northern Chile, I had accidentally ingested kava leaves. It's like a tea that's good for altitude sickness.
Is that cocaine?
It's the derivative.
Yeah,
it's a derivative.
Kava leaves one that goes. Okay.
Yeah, and I was like, it was all in Spanish, and they're talking to me about altitude and like tea, and if I wanted some, I'm cold, I'm by the fire. I'm like, yeah, sure. And I start sipping it, and then within 5 minutes, I'm like, wow, why do I really love talking to this person right now? Like, there's something. It reminded me of being at like a party and finding someone that I did not really find interesting, like the most curious person I've ever met, and I wanted to talk to them for an hour straight. I'm like, huh. And then it all came together in my brain. I'm like, wait, kava leaves are like an indigenous like treatment for altitude sickness here. Huh. Yeah, I'm drinking kava leaves right now. I should probably stop and tell someone about it. Because that's the other fucked up part about addiction is even without the motive and intent to do that and realizing it and not doing anymore, pouring it out, electing to tell no one could evoke that kind of shame response where it could grow into something unnecessary.
Yeah.
Like I'm lying, I'm being deceitful. Was I actually aware of what I was doing? Like get in your head about it, and it can create something way worse.
Yeah.
Where you're like the sense of hiding stuff from people, and like all that, it creates the distance from connection. It could create all sorts of problems.
Okay. How did we get on this topic?
You took gummies.
Yeah, the gummies.
How did you?
So
how did we get on the topic of you taking gummies?
I don't know. How did I get on that topic? How does this always happen to us? I mean, like, I have to check the time because, like, you and I could keep talking and it'd be like 4 o'clock and like
I
that.
know. Yeah. Oh, something that's kind of connected to this idea of child attachment rupture. I could maybe wonder about how that shows up in session. Something interesting, and this has happened, thematically throughout therapy with people. Try to be general. Like, someone who is experienced, well, I won't go into the theory of who they are as a child yet. I'll say in my experience as a counselor in the room, like validating, acknowledging, and leaning in to an emotional vulnerability. And then they begin to, they'll say things like, what's next? Or they'll divert to a different content, or they'll share a different story that they can kind of laugh about that feels safer. And I pull them back, and I pull them back, and I keep going into this other space. I'll acknowledge in the moment, hey, what feels more vulnerable to talk about, right? This situation that you shared 5 minutes ago, or what you're talking about now. They'll be like, oh, 5 minutes ago. I was like, yeah, I can kind of notice that because your voice changed and shifted, and I felt that you felt something when you talked about that. And you pull them back into that area. I've noticed that when dealing with someone who has had like an emotional neglect or abusive past with parents, sometimes the reaction I can get from clients is anger towards me. Like that I don't have a plan. You're not fixing things. Like, Evan, you're supposed to be able to take me to these places. Like they'll like push it on to me, and then I'll acknowledge the anger towards me, and then kind of wonder about what is this anger doing? Like, what is it doing in our conversation? Was it doing in the room? It is obviously walling them off from vulnerability and putting the onus on me to do that. It's like they kind of expect me to be a show pony to get them into this emotional space.
Yeah, and I
like
think a
kind
lot
of question
clients
my
who've
expertise.
had previous therapy.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, because you're not giving them the answers. You're not giving them the answers. You're not being directive. And I think you have to, as therapists, we have to train our clients in many ways, not only with the modality we use, but train them to not expect us to give them the answers. That's not therapy. Like, I can't hand you on a platter a recipe for improving your life. That's advice giving. And I think that's very difficult for many, many, many clients.
And
Especially
also,
those who are like people pleasers to some extent.
well, too, is traveling into an emotionally vulnerable space with a client is a delicate process and has to be assessed thoroughly, because, okay, yeah, you want me to cut you open? I can do that. How effective is that going to be for you?
Yeah, it's not going to be.
That's why I'm like, that's where like the
intolerable.
show pony expectation is. It's like, oh, you said you were going to do trauma work with me. It's like, sure, but do you want me to strip you down and shame bash you in front of the town? Or would you like to have a more private, safe exploration of this? Like, this is a process here that needs to be held responsibly.
Right. Exactly. And as therapists, we're not trying to evoke shame consciously and make them feel shame more so. That's going to happen naturally. But
Yeah.
we do have to help them cope with it and deal with it on their own internally. But you're right. Like, so many people, I think, want to figure out, well, what do I need to do, behaviorally to not feel this way anymore? X, Y, and Z. Please tell me.
Yeah,
And I
like,
think that is a very
or they'll
difficult expectation to manage.
they'll defend the process of avoidance by saying, well, we've talked about this. We've already had talked about this
Yeah.
before. We've identified this. And then I have to kind of demystify my modality, which is often, okay, we have that intellectual understanding, the scaffold, which is a very important, valuable part of this process. However, there's an emotional realm that wraps itself around this intellectual structure that hasn't been previewed or experienced.
Yes. So how do you pierce through that intellectualism as a defense? Because I don't know if you're like me, but like I can go intellectual very easily, and I see that within myself. And then we're having having an intellectual conversation about the quote problem, but therapy is really not happening because, as you just said, the feeling state, the somatic state underneath that intellectual defense is not taking place. So how do you pierce through the intellectual?
Yeah, it depends, obviously. And a lot of it is just time and creating space and throwing the welcome mat out for emotional vulnerability. But also, I think the more effective approach for people that divert from emotional vulnerability via intellect is actually the use of immediacy and the here and now relationship, and self-disclosure about the emotions in the room. It's so harder for an intellectual person to like divert from that because it's not theoretical based in terms of other people outside of the room or previous experiences that they've already learned to narrate. It's in the moment they have to orient to it, which I think is more challenging to do intellectually. It almost feels like cornering them emotionally.
Mm-hmm. Because I know that a lot of people use thinking and intellectualism not only as a defense, but also as a coping skill to find safety, like thinking their way to safety.
Absolutely.
So I have used that observation in session before. It's like, I'll say something to the effect of, I hear you intellectualizing your experience. Can you tell me what's going on in your body? And they'll be like, yeah, I'm feeling really tense. Okay, so then now is it possible that you are thinking your way to safety so that your body doesn't feel tense, so that you can find your own aha moment or your own conclusion to help regulate yourself and feel safe? And then that usually can open up some new doors for discussion.
Yeah, and then depending on rapport, right? Like sometimes I could just be like, well, hey, is that the intellect or the emotional realm you're using?
Yeah.
You know, like there can be little ways to kind of, I mean, I think initially it's being more artful is important, but after that dynamic is demystified, you can start to say more simplistic interventions that like track and remind them of the intellectual avoidance. And I know that also like the use of silence seems to be pretty effective with intellectual avoidance. And also clients that have that high intellect, it goes back to what we were talking about before, like that subconscious emotional connection that I can't remember what the word was that you were using, like the perceived emotional experience without words. What I've found
the attunement.
is like, what I've found is the emotional attunement can be very powerful because clients that have that intellect experience, they can vocalize a subset of emotions and experiences, and that's what they narrate. They can't vocalize the subset of emotional experience that isn't tied to intellect. So if you ask them to verbalize it, it shifts to their intellect. If you focus on emotional attunement and presence in the moment, they don't need the words, right? You can tell that they have this emotional processing that feels vulnerable and expressive and experiential, but you don't get the luxury of hearing them conceptualize it, because if they do, it'll shift to the intellect again. You just have to, I have to trust that like through that emotional attunement and intuition, there's something very delicate and vulnerable being brought into the room without it being vocalized. And then I can, revisit that moment in a different time as well. Because I've noticed, like, if I try to get someone to explain that, like, because I've done that before, right? That emotional attunement process happens. There's silence. I feel that there's this vulnerability in the room. There's something very delicate. There's something being shown that is often ignored or hidden or not able to be, like, connected to. And then I'll ask them, and then it just darts out of the room. That emotional processing.
Because they're not ready to reveal.
Well, it's just because their way to conceptualize is what creates the avoidance. So sometimes with those types of clients, I begin to wonder, like, is it even necessary to vocalize it? Or in the silence, I will reflect as if I'm an 8-year-old. Like, you're sad. You're mad. Like, very, very simple.
But I think what you're
3-word reflections.
But the fact that you just said, like, an 8-year-old makes me think of that concept I was trying to talk about last time, dissociative attunement, because I suspect in those moments there is, like, an emotional part from that age range, like 8 years old-ish, that is showing up in the room, but is being, to some extent, silenced, or there's a protector part stepping in that's talking for him or her.
So when they articulate that they're at their current age, but when they're just experiencing it, and I can reflect that elementary understanding, their young self is present.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I did a lot of research and training. Well, not a lot. That's an exaggeration, but enough trainings called ego state intervention with Robin Shapiro, and I highly recommend that because I know that you've probably heard, like, internal family systems. It's all stems from the same place of transactional analysis, but it's a lot more. It's less rigid, and it's not as, like, branded as internal family systems, but it's essentially the same thing, the same concept. And what I have noticed is, like, when I bring in those ego state interventions, or just mentioning, like, younger versions of ourselves as emotional parts or whatnot, it helps the client become, like, 2 things happen. 1, the client becomes a little more cognitively flexible. And then 2, the relationship with shame becomes better, in the sense that 2 ideas can be true, right? I can have both compassion for my mom, in the sense I recognize the ugliness of her own life, but then I can also hold true that I'm angry with her for how she treated me.
Yeah, that it was still fucked up.
And being able to do that dance, and it was still fucked up. Like, those 2 things can be true at the same time. And so ego state has really helped me introduce that cognitive flexibility to clients. It's been very powerful. I
will say that emotional attunement, because I've experienced that throughout working. I guess I didn't have the word to describe it until you and I started talking about it. But it's like, it's a weird emotional experience for myself too. Like, it's like I'm not sad. Like, I don't feel like, oh, I'm sad, I need to cry or something. But it's like this, it's like there's so much, like, flooded emotion in the room, and it's not even that they're crying, right? It's like this, like, silent, unsaid emotional attunement experience, where it's like, if I allowed myself, I could literally, like, sob, but I don't feel sad. It's like this overwhelming emotional.
Yeah, and you recognize it's not about you. It's like you're picking up on something, like a radio signal.
It's a weird, because I'm like, wait, I don't feel sad. I don't even feel sad about what they're saying. It's not even like, it's just a very odd experience where it's like there's like a flood happen. It's like, there's all this, here's an analogy. It'd be like, there's like all this humidity in the room, and there's like these water droplets that are about to, like, trickle off of me. It's like this indirect perspiration.
But this, like, is
that
synchronicity.
Emotion is so palpable in the room that it's like dripping off of you.
What is it? It's a word. You see it with birds. when one bird changes direction, the flock of birds changes with it. Or even with musicians, when one musician starts drumming a certain beat, other musicians will chime in and drum the exact same beat. It's an attunement, but there's a better word for it.
Like
It's escaping me.
synchronicity, or
It's like a synchronicity. It's in the same category: attunement, synchronicity. Here, I'm going to
we
reach
call
for
it
my paper.
jamming. Yeah, like we as musicians, we'd just be like, we'd call it a jam session. That's what we would say, but that's probably pretty layman.
Entrainment.
Yeah.
That's what you're picking up on. Entrainment. Entrainment happens when an external rhythm causes rhythms within one's brain and body to synchronize with that external rhythm.
Yeah, I think what affords that,
And I think that
is like this very hyper awareness and almost meditative state of the here and now. So like anytime I experience that, nothing else in the world exists. And it could be only 3 seconds, but it's unlike anything I'd ever experienced prior to, like, not just being a therapist, but being someone, like, developing to such a place to where I can get out of my own way more confidently and consistently and just kind of be there present as opposed to in my head. It happens more and more. And I guess it's probably not something a lot of people experience. It's probably pretty isolated to like a therapeutic dynamic.
And that's probably why therapeutic dynamics can be so healing, is that when that entrainment is achieved, is because it's also like a corrective emotional experience, because then the therapeutic alliance, the therapeutic relationship becomes akin, similar to like a mother and child or a father and child, in the sense that we're in harmony, we're in synchronicity. There's a responsiveness that's going on
To my needs that are intuitive.
That
I
many
can say
people
too
didn't
is that the
Yeah.
pausing and the emotional attunement that happens in silence, there's a pattern that occurs with me where they'll ask to go to the bathroom, so they'll leave the room.
Oh yeah,
So it's like
that's interesting.
that's
gonna
the
notice that
that's
when
the
my clients ask
fascinating
to use the
element
bathroom.
where it's like getting into such a vulnerable conversation without saying anything. It's fucking crazy. Like that's like
But it's interesting
being
because I
able
have clients
to
who will even.
go ahead.
I'm sorry, there's a lag.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, some clients even ask to go use the bathroom. Some will inform me, but other people are like, "Is it okay if I go use the bathroom?"
That's
And
what
it's
they
like,
do.
Oh, I need to start verbalizing that and noticing.
So you've seen that before and it hasn't
Like
registered as like a way to like detach or disconnect?
No, and I need to pick up on that more when it's happening.
Yeah, like when are they wanting to use the bathroom? Is it connected? Maybe it's not, but what were we talking about? What was the experience? Yeah, sometimes I'll like pick at that. Sometimes I don't. It just depends, right? I'm not always gonna, because I think there's a danger in like even if it's accurate, like people feel uncomfortable when you over assess. It could be too like psychoanalytical. So you kind of just have to gauge the room and where they're at in their process too. But yeah, sometimes I'll like point it out and try to explore that with them.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if it happens more than once.
Yeah. Very
So
interesting.
in my like theoretical beliefs, I would say if that happens, they don't feel safe with me in that emotional space.
Well, that, or they just can't tolerate
Within
whatever's coming up
themselves.
for them within themselves. Yeah.
Or both. Yeah.
And I think that, yeah, the emotional vulnerability can be just so difficult to hold for some people.
And I think my own work has informed me of this like emotional attunement process to minimize the amount of intellectual avoidance, because I can recall in therapy some of the more like vulnerable moments for myself were when there were long pauses and I was just there and they were present. And then when I would begin to describe that experience, it would go away. I get into my analytical adult self to describe that vulnerability, and then I didn't feel vulnerable anymore. It went away.
Mm-hmm.
Which kind of sucks,
It's
because
bringing
I
up
would
for
I would
me
like
this
to
idea
be able
of,
to.
yeah.
Sorry, if whoever's listening, we're not actually interrupting each other. It's just it's lagged a little. it's like we're playing a little back and forth boxing session. But go ahead.
So that just brought me to this other experience I've had with a couple of clients where there's intense staring at me. Like the client is staring at me intently or intensely, and I need to address it in some way, shape, or form, because it's not to be threatening. Like, I don't get the sense that they're trying to like dominate me or, intimidate me or anything silly like that. But it's more like I'm getting the sense that they're trying to ascertain whether I am a safe person to be revealing with, to share more with. And by intently staring, it's like they're sizing me up or trying to, basically judge whether I'm a safe person. I think I need to
they're
start
probably
mentioning that
like
somehow.
trying to
make a
read
process
into
question out of it.
affect and nonverbals to determine whether or not you're safe.
Yeah.
Which can be hard too, because, I think at times if I'm trying to like monitor my affect and presence, I can unintentionally appear as though I'm like stonewalling, like, because I could have like a very flat affect and not as much like human mannerism. And so I have to like try to navigate that too, because I want to be a blank board for them to paint on, but I also don't want to appear as though I'm like this expert Freudian person that's like a mannequin, trying to balance that, allowing my own like personality and essence to be present as well. As there's a lot going on.
That's why, it could be very exhausting. So what is the rest of your day like? I'm going to have to check out soon. I got a 12 o'clock.
Yeah, we're good. We did